840 here, Big 550 KTRS. David Stokes is the development director for the Show Me Institute. He's also a policy guy for us. He's been here doing this for a while. David Stokes, welcome back, Big 550 KTRS.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning.
All right, so they're coming up with this new idea for a promise zone in North County. Sounds like a great idea. Well, what are you so upset about this for?
I'm not so upset about it as much as well, I guess I am upset about it. It's frustrating to see these examples where politicians want to address the need. They want to address Ferguson and other problems. So they'll come up with a new program. They'll have the big press conference.
Yes.
They'll all appear there. They'll make promises. You know what? These programs never achieve their goals.
Wait a minute.
They never succeed.
Hold on. It's called the Promise Zone.
How could it not?
How could it not
fantastic?
succeed?
We have a blog post up at our website written by my colleague Joe Miller about the long litany of these types of designation zones. I mean, right now the St. Louis, they're already an empowerment zone, which is totally different than a promise zone. They're already in an enterprise zone. You have all these silly programs. So I recommend people check out the blog post by Joe Miller, but also. There was a book written about 7-8 years ago, and I would bet, McGraw, that it got a lot of attention. I bet you had the author on. A gentleman named Colin Gordon wrote a book called Mapping Decline. He's from Iowa.
Right.
And he wrote a book about exactly the history of all these types of programs in St. Louis over the last 60, 70 years, from urban renewal and slum clearance to enterprise zones and on and on and on. And the message of the book is, by any measure, the absolute abject total failure of program after program. So if you think this promise zone is going to turn Ferguson or North St. Louis around, you know what? It just isn't.
It's one thing if a program doesn't work. It's another thing if a program does harm. These programs actually doing harm?
Some of them do. Absolutely. We talk about TIF on this program all the time, tax increment financing.
Right.
And TIF is a program like enterprise zones, promise zones, empowerment zones, that TIF actively does harm. TIF is actively making our economy and our tax base weaker in the St. Louis region. Some of these other programs, do I have the data to prove they're harmful? No, I don't. I do know this, that when you just give politicians an opportunity to make empty promises and appear to be doing something, and then with no interest in seeing whether that program 10 years down the line will actually work, that's harmful, because it gets people buying into the idea that the federal government is going to step in and save the day in Ferguson, when with all the problems we have in the St. Louis region, amount of federal expenditures is not one of them.
I equate this to when the police have a drug bust and they put all the drugs and the money onto the table and they say, look, see how great we are, that, and people are like, oh great, well we're winning the war on drugs, great, fantastic, right? But it's a nice photo op, it's a nice PR, it's a nice name, Promise Zone, sounds great, but it really doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the problem or begin to address the real problems that are going on.
And that's a great comparison, and I think you hit the nail on the head.
All right, well, good. Have a good day. At least we're perfect.
Great segment.
All right.
Run more commercials. Perfect.
The gas tax bill that is going on, now they're talking about, what, a 1.5 cent sales gas tax?
There's a bill now before the state Senate, moving in the state legislature, which I think most bills before the legislature are actively harmful. I think many of the others are maybe they will, who knows, some of them won't be so bad. This is one bill that would be actively beneficial to the state. This bill being considered now by the state Senate, which passed out of committee and has passed through a few votes, would have a small increase in the gas tax of 1.5 cents.
Okay.
A slightly larger gas tax increase of diesel fuel of 3.5 cents for trucks, and that's very, very common in other states that diesel fuel is taxed a little higher than regular gas.
On the theory that trucks do more damage to the road than regular cars.
Trucks do exponentially more damage to the highway than regular cars. There's nothing wrong with taxing them slightly more for it. This bill also gets serious about authorizing MoDOT to look into tolling the major highways in the state, starting with I-70. It doesn't just turn it all over to MoDOT. It says the legislature reserves the right to approve any proposal, but it gets serious about the state looking at tolling. So it's an outstanding bill. It's a bill that, if passed by both houses and signed by the governor, would genuinely improve the our infrastructure in this state, improve the way we fund highways and bridges. It might sound weird to be excited about a gas tax increase, but maybe it's a comment on me that I'm excited about this proposal because this would be genuinely beneficial to our community, the small gas tax increase with greater authorization for future tolling.
Now let's go back to the federal funds argument, because supposedly this 1.5 cent gas tax on a gallon of gas then allows us to pick up all the available federal funds.
Well, I don't know if it allows us to pick up all of it
For
or
the
just
gas
a little
tax,
bit
yeah.
more of it.
Right.
It allows us to do the match for the federal gas tax that we all pay when we buy gas in Missouri. Everybody in this country pays the same federal gas tax.
Right. So we would lose it if we don't raise this rate or whatever the math is, whatever the formula is. Supposedly, it's being reported that this 1.5 cent sales tax would then allow us to pick up more of the federal funds as opposed to let them go to some other state.
It would, and I'm not someone who's going to say we should always be chasing federal funds for every program or that we should do our policy based on what we can get from the federal government. It so happens that increasing the state gas tax to fund our own highways and bridges is the right thing to do, and the fact that we all put in for the federal gas tax and then some more of it might be able to come back here for a role that is a legitimate role of government, maintaining our highways and bridges, I think that would be a good thing. I don't, however, again, want to repeat that we should base policy in Missouri based on what we can get from the federal government.
So who's against the toll roads? Is there a group? Is it city? Is it urban? Is it country? I mean, is it farmers? I mean, who's standing in the way of Missouri having a serious, honest debate and actually getting toll roads up and going?
Well, I think we've been having that debate for the past few years, and I'm thankful for it. But certainly the main stumbling blocks to tolling are the trucking industry, which is adamantly opposed to tolling, basically everywhere. And they've got a state, and we have a very large trucking industry in Missouri, and they provide a lot of good jobs for people out there. So the trucking industry is opposed. I think they'd actually prefer a slightly higher diesel tax increase than to the idea of tolling, because when you implement tolling, oftentimes you charge trucks more than regular cars anyway.
Right.
So the trucking industry, people who live along I-70 and fear that they're going to be especially
hit for
it by having to pay it all the time. And there are ways to design the system so that somebody who lives in Columbia doesn't have to pay a toll every time they visit a friend in Columbia. I mean, there are ways to design that to address that legitimate issue.
Right.
And then finally, I just think there's just the natural resistance to change, particularly the natural resistance to any major change. We don't have any tolled highways in Missouri. We have one bridge in the Ozarks with a toll, and people just sort of we've done it this way for a long time, and people are hesitant to do it, but it works in other states. It's a good way to make sure that the people who use the infrastructure are the ones who primarily fund it, and it shouldn't be the only ones who fund it. Everybody benefits from a good highway and bridge system, but the people who use it a lot should pay a little bit more, and higher gas taxes and tolls are the way to do that.
Only a few days left in the legislative session, right?
There are about 2 weeks, and it's time.
Do you
usually
think
this is the time where things start moving and getting done.
Do you think this has got a chance to get to the governor's desk?
I do think it has a chance, and maybe I'm an optimist, but I think it's got a great chance to get out of the Senate. And I think with the gas tax increase being so small, and the tolling authorization just allowing MoDOT to seriously consider it further, but not just impose it on their own, I think it has a chance to get through the House. Yeah,
I would call you a cockeyed optimist, but that's just me. So there you go.
I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult.
I don't know if it is either.
It doesn't sound like it is.
David Stokes, when can we read you? When can we see you?
We have a lot of information on both of these issues, the special taxing districts and toll roads and more at showmeinstitute.org, and you can follow me on Twitter at David C. Stokes.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Larry